My husband said, "Tomorrow I'm getting my brother's $1 million inheritance. Sign the divorce papers. The movers are coming soon. Get out of my house." I calmly signed. "Congratulations, dear, but you missed one detail." Good day, dear listeners. It's Clara again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I had been married to Richard for 32 years. 32 years of building a life together, raising our 2 children in the house my parents left me, watching seasons change through the same kitchen window. We weren't perfect. What couple is? But I thought we were solid. I thought we had weathered enough storms to make it to the calm waters of retirement together. How naive I was. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday evening in March. Richard came home late, smelling of cologne I hadn't bought him. When I asked about his day, he snapped at me, something he rarely did. "Can a man have some privacy?" he barked, retreating to the garage. I stood there in our kitchen, a wooden spoon still in my hand, wondering what I had done wrong. The late nights became frequent. "Business meetings," he said. "Drinks with old college friends. A poker game that ran long." Each excuse came with less eye contact, less conviction. I wasn't stupid. I'd been a woman long enough to recognize the signs, but I was a coward, too afraid to confront what I might find. Then his brother Robert died. A heart attack at 59, sudden and brutal. Richard flew to Boston for the funeral, and when he returned, something in him had changed. There was a lightness to his step, an energy I hadn't seen in years. At first, I thought it was relief. Robert had been ill for a while, and maybe Richard was simply glad his brother's suffering had ended. But then came the phone calls. Whispered conversations he took in the garage or the backyard. The way he smiled at his phone screen when he thought I wasn't looking. The new wardrobe, expensive shirts, tailored pants, things far too fancy for a man who worked in insurance. "Robert left me everything," he told me one night over dinner, barely able to contain his excitement. The apartment in Boston, the investments, the savings. Margaret, we're talking about over $1 million. I should have been happy for him, for us. Instead, a cold dread settled in my stomach. Because the way he said "me" and not "us" told me everything I needed to know. The truth came crashing down on a Thursday evening. I had just finished watering my roses, the ones I'd planted 20 years ago when we first moved into this house. My house, the one my parents had left to me. When Richard stormed in with a woman I'd never seen before. She was younger, maybe 45, with sharp eyes and a harder edge than I'd ever carried. "Margaret," Richard said, his voice cold and businesslike. "Tomorrow, I'm receiving my brother's inheritance. Finally. All the paperwork's been processed. The money will be transferred to my account." He pulled out a folder and slapped it on the kitchen table. Our kitchen table, where we'd eaten thousands of meals, where our children had done their homework. "Sign the divorce papers. I've already had them drawn up. The movers are coming this weekend to collect my things. You need to be out of my house by then." "His house? My house?" The woman beside him smirked, already measuring the curtains with her eyes. How dare they? How dare they stand in my kitchen, in the home my mother had bequeathed to me, and tell me to leave? But I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Instead, something cold and clear settled over me. The same feeling I'd had when I was 9 years old and watched my father face down a man who tried to cheat him in business. Calm, calculating, patient. I picked up the pen and signed the papers. Every single one. Richard blinked, clearly surprised by my compliance. The woman's smirk widened. "Congratulations, dear," I said sweetly, setting down the pen. "I hope you'll be very happy with your inheritance. But there's one small detail you seem to have overlooked. Richard's face flickered with uncertainty. What detail? I smiled. Really smiled for the first time in months. This house isn't yours to throw me out of. It never was. My parents left it to me, in my name alone. It's in the deed, Richard. You've been living in my house for 32 years. The color drained from his face. So, by all means, I continued, my voice steady as steel, collect your inheritance tomorrow. Enjoy it. But you're the one who'll need to find somewhere else to live. After they left, Richard slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows, that woman clicking behind him in her ridiculous heels, I stood alone in my kitchen and let myself shake. Just for a moment. Just long enough to release the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Then I made tea. Chamomile, the way my mother taught me. Steady hands. Clear mind. I sat at the table and forced myself to think through what had just happened. What had I lost? What did I still have? The practical questions kept the panic at bay. Our joint bank account. Richard would drain it, I was certain. We had about $43,000 in there, saved over years of careful budgeting. He'd likely take every penny the moment that inheritance cleared. That money was gone. I had to accept it. My retirement account was separate, thank God. 26 years of working as a school librarian had left me with a modest but solid 401k. He couldn't touch that. The house was mine. Fully mine. My parents, bless them, had been careful people. When they died in a car accident 15 years ago, they'd left their home to me specifically, with my name alone on the deed. Richard had never been added. At the time, it seemed like a formality we'd just never gotten around to. Now I understood. My mother had been protecting me, even from beyond the grave. But what would a divorce actually mean? I was 61 years old. I hadn't worked in 3 years since I retired. Could I afford to maintain this house on my own? Property taxes, utilities, repairs, it all added up. Stop it, Margaret, I told myself. One problem at a time. I pulled out my laptop, the one my daughter Sarah had given me for Christmas, and started researching. What were my rights in a divorce? How would Richard's inheritance be classified? We lived in New York, an equitable distribution state. That inheritance he was so eager to claim, if it came through after I signed the divorce papers, was it marital property or separate? My hands flew across the keyboard. Article after article. Legal websites. Divorce attorney blogs, and then I found it. The answer that made my heart race. Inheritance received during marriage is generally considered separate property, unless it's commingled with marital assets. But, and this was the crucial part, if divorce papers were filed but not finalized, assets acquired during that period could still be considered marital property depending on timing and jurisdiction. Richard thought he was so clever, timing the divorce to happen right before he received the money, keeping it all for himself. But he'd made a mistake. Several, actually. First, I'd signed the papers. Yes, but they weren't filed yet. Nothing was official. Second, even if they were filed tomorrow, New York law required a waiting period. And third, oh, this was Rich. He'd been so eager to get me out that he'd put in writing his intention to claim the house as his own. The house that was legally, irrevocably, completely mine. I could use that. I could use all of it. I needed a lawyer. A good one. But who? I couldn't exactly ask Richard's golf buddy, who'd handled our wills. I couldn't afford to tip my hand. Then I remembered. Linda Chen. She'd been a parent at the school where I worked years ago. Her daughter Emily had spent hours in my library, and we'd bonded over our love of mystery novels. Linda had gone to law school late in life and now practiced family law. We'd stayed in touch through Christmas cards, the occasional coffee. I found her number and stared at my phone. It was 9:47 p.m. Too late to call, but I sent a text. Linda, it's Margaret Hartley. I need legal help urgently. Can we meet tomorrow? It's about divorce. The response came within 2 minutes. My office, 10 a.m. Bring any documents you have. Don't sign anything else. Relief flooded through me. I had an ally. A plan was forming. I walked through my house, truly seeing it for the first time in years. The hardwood floors my father had installed himself. The built-in bookshelves he'd crafted in the living room. The garden my mother had planted. This wasn't just property. This was my inheritance, my history, my home. Richard wanted to erase me from his life like I was nothing? Like 32 years meant nothing? Fine. But he was about to learn that throwing away a woman who'd spent 3 decades managing a library, organizing, cataloging, planning, protecting precious resources, was the biggest mistake of his miserable life. I made a list. Everything I needed to gather before morning: marriage certificate, tax returns from the past 7 years, bank statements, the deed to the house, photos of Richard's recent purchases, a timeline of his suspicious behavior. I didn't sleep that night. I prepared. Linda Chen's office was in a modest building downtown, sandwiched between a dentist and an accountant. I arrived 15 minutes early, clutching a folder stuffed with documents I'd organized by date and category. Old habits from my librarian days. Linda greeted me with a warm hug that nearly broke my composure. Margaret, sit. Tell me everything. I did. Every detail. The late nights, the cologne, Richard's sudden personality change after his brother's death, the woman in my kitchen, the divorce papers, his demand that I leave my own house. Linda listened without interrupting, taking notes in sharp, precise handwriting. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. Do you have the divorce papers he gave you? I slid them across her desk. She read through them carefully, her expression darkening with each page. Margaret, these papers are amateur hour. He had someone draw them up, probably an online service or a cheap lawyer who didn't do their homework. Look here, she pointed. He's listed the house as marital property to be sold and divided, but you said it's in your name only? Yes, I brought the deed. I handed it over. Linda studied it, then smiled. A fierce, predatory smile that reminded me why I'd always liked her. He's already committed fraud. He's claiming ownership of property that isn't his. That alone could get him in serious trouble. My heart pounded. What should I do? First, we file a response to these divorce papers. We'll contest every single claim he's made. Second, we document everything, and I mean everything. His affair, if we can prove it. His financial moves. His attempts to defraud you of your property. Third, we move fast. If that inheritance clears tomorrow like he said, we need to establish that it came through during the marriage, before any divorce is finalized. Can we stop him from getting it? No, it's his inheritance, but Linda's smile widened. New York is an equitable distribution state. Inheritance is usually separate property, but if he commingles it with marital assets, or if he uses it to support himself during the divorce proceedings, we can make a claim on it, especially if we can prove he deliberately tried to time this divorce to exclude you from assets you're entitled to. Hope surged through me. How do we prove that? His own words. Linda tapped the divorce papers. He dated these for yesterday, the same day he told you about the inheritance clearing tomorrow. He's documented his own intent to defraud you. It's beautiful, really. He's handed us his head on a platter. We spent the next 2 hours building a strategy. Linda would file a response to the divorce papers immediately, contesting all property claims and requesting full financial disclosure. She'd also send Richard's lawyer, once we figured out who it was, a formal notice that I was represented by counsel, and all communication should go through her. "He's going to be furious when he gets this," Linda warned. "Be prepared." "I can handle it." "Can you stay somewhere else for a few days? With your daughter?" I shook my head. "I'm not leaving my house. He's the one who should leave." Linda hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, but if he threatens you, if he becomes violent, you call the police immediately. Promise me." "I promise." I left her office feeling lighter than I had in months. I had a plan. I had an advocate. I had power. But when I got home, I found Richard's truck in the driveway. My stomach clenched. He was supposed to be at work. Why was he here? I walked in through the front door and found him in the living room with that woman and another man. Older, in his 50s, wearing an expensive suit. A lawyer, I realized. "Margaret," Richard said coldly. "This is Kenneth Bradshaw, my attorney. We need to discuss the division of assets." I set down my purse slowly. "Any discussion about assets will go through my attorney, Linda Chen. I'm sure Mr. Bradshaw has her contact information by now." Richard's face flushed red. "Your attorney? What the hell are you talking about?" "I'm talking about protecting my rights in this divorce you initiated. Did you really think I'd just roll over and let you steal my house? It's not your house. We've lived here for 30 years. I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo of the deed I'd taken that morning. "It's my house, my name, inherited from my parents. You have no legal claim to it whatsoever." The woman, I still didn't know her name, stepped forward. "Richard told me this house was his." "Then Richard lied to you," I said simply. "Wouldn't be the first time he's lied recently, would it?" Kenneth Bradshaw cleared his throat. "Mrs. Hartley, perhaps we can discuss this rationally." "Through our attorneys, Mr. Bradshaw. I have nothing to say to you or my husband outside of legal channels. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have things to do in my house." I walked past them into the kitchen, my hands shaking but my head held high. Behind me, I heard Richard explode. "You bitch! That inheritance is mine! You're not getting a penny!" I turned slowly. "We'll see what the judge says about that, won't we?" His face was purple with rage. The mask had fully slipped now. This was who he really was, and I was finally seeing clearly. Linda moved fast. Within 48 hours, she'd filed a comprehensive response to Richard's divorce petition, along with a motion for exclusive use and occupancy of the marital residence, my house. She requested a restraining order preventing Richard from disposing of any assets, including his incoming inheritance, until the court could review the financial situation. The hearing was set for the following Tuesday. 5 days to prepare. Richard called me 17 times that first day. I didn't answer. He sent texts that devolved from angry to pleading to threatening. I screenshot every single one and forwarded them to Linda. "Keep doing exactly what you're doing," she told me. "Let him hang himself." On Friday, the inheritance came through. I knew because Richard showed up at the house at 6 in the morning, pounding on the door. I watched through the upstairs window as he screamed at my front porch. "I know you're in there, Margaret. The money's in my account. You can't touch it. Do you hear me?" I called the police. They arrived within 10 minutes and asked him to leave. He went, but not before shouting that I'd regret this. The officer who took my statement was a young woman named Torres. "Ma'am, do you feel safe here alone?" "I have an alarm system," I said, "and I'm not leaving my home." She gave me her card anyway. "Call if he comes back." Tuesday arrived. I wore my navy blue suit, the one I'd worn to parent-teacher conferences for 26 years. Professional, respectable, unshakable. The courthouse was cold and sterile. Richard sat on the opposite side of the hallway with Kenneth Bradshaw and that woman, whose name I'd learned was Diane Summers. She worked at Richard's insurance company. Of course she did. When we entered the courtroom, Judge Patricia Monroe, a stern woman in her 60s, reviewed the filings with a deepening frown. "Mr. Bradshaw," she said finally, "your client listed a property at 1847 Oakwood Drive as marital property subject to division. But according to Mrs. Hartley's deed, which appears to be properly recorded, this property is her separate property inherited from her parents. Can you explain this discrepancy?" Bradshaw stammered. "Your Honor, my client was under the impression that after 32 years of marriage, impressions aren't facts, counselor. The deed is clear. Does your client have any documentation showing he has an ownership interest in this property?" "No, Your Honor, but—" "Then why was it included in the divorce petition as property to be divided?" Silence. Richard whispered urgently to Bradshaw, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. Judge Monroe turned to Linda. "Ms. Chen, your motion for exclusive occupancy?" "Granted. Mrs. Hartley has demonstrated clear ownership. Mr. Hartley has no legal right to remain in or claim that property." I watched Richard's face crumble. He'd been so certain, so smug. But we weren't done. "Now," Judge Monroe continued, "regarding the inheritance. Ms. Chen, you've filed a motion to include these funds in the marital estate." Linda stood. "Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Hartley deliberately timed this divorce petition to coincide with receiving his inheritance, as evidenced by his own statements to Mrs. Hartley. The inheritance was received during the marriage and before any divorce was finalized. Furthermore, we believe there's evidence of dissipation of marital assets and fraud." "That's outrageous!" Richard shouted, standing up. "Mr. Hartley, sit down and be quiet," Judge Monroe said icily. "You'll have your turn." She ordered a full financial discovery. Both Richard and I would have to provide complete accounting of all assets, expenses, and transactions for the past 3 years. The inheritance funds would be frozen pending further review. "Frozen?" Richard bellowed. "That's my money, from my brother." "Mr. Hartley, one more outburst and I'll hold you in contempt. The funds remain frozen until I can determine what portion, if any, constitutes marital property. We'll reconvene in 30 days. Dismissed." Outside the courtroom, Richard tried to corner me. "You think you're so smart? You're going to pay for this, Margaret. That money is mine." Diane grabbed his arm. "Richard, let's go. You're making it worse." As they walked away, I heard her say, "You told me the house was yours. You told me she'd sign everything without a fight. What else have you lied about?" "Oh, that was delicious." Linda squeezed my shoulder. "You did great in there. Now comes the hard part, the waiting, the discovery process. Are you okay?" I was exhausted. The adrenaline of the past week had drained me completely. "I need to go home. I need to rest. Take a few days. Don't engage with him. Let me handle everything." I did exactly that. For 3 days, I unplugged. I gardened. I read books I'd been meaning to get to for years. I slept 10 hours a night. My daughter Sarah called every day, offering to visit, but I told her I needed this time alone. I needed to remember who I was, who I'd been before Richard, who I would be after. By the 4th day, I felt human again, strong again, ready for whatever came next. On the 5th day, Richard sent an email. Not to me directly, to Linda, but she forwarded it with a note. "He's trying a different approach. Be careful." The email was polite, almost apologetic. He wanted to meet with me privately, without lawyers, to discuss things rationally. He acknowledged that emotions had run high, and perhaps they could find a reasonable solution that didn't bankrupt both of us in legal fees. I read it 3 times looking for the trap. What do you think? I asked Linda over the phone. I think he's panicked. The frozen inheritance, the exclusive occupancy order, the financial discovery, it's all hitting him now. He's realizing this won't be the easy divorce he planned. Should I meet with him? Absolutely not. Anything discussed without attorneys present could be used against you. He's trying to manipulate you, Margaret. That's what abusers do when they lose control. They switch tactics. First anger, then charm. She was right. I knew she was right. But the next day, Richard showed up at my door. Alone this time. No Diane, no lawyer, just him, looking smaller somehow. Older. Margaret, please. Can we just talk? 5 minutes. Against my better judgment, I opened the door but didn't invite him in. We stood on the porch, the same porch where he'd screamed at me a week ago. I'm sorry, he said. For all of it. For Diane. For the way I handled things. For trying to take the house. I don't know what I was thinking. I waited. There would be more. This divorce is going to destroy us both financially. The legal fees alone. Margaret, we could settle this privately. You keep the house. That's fair, I admit that now. I keep the inheritance. We split the savings account and our retirement funds 50-50. Clean break, no more fighting. It was tempting, I'll admit. The thought of ending this nightmare, of not spending months in legal battles, of just being done with it all. But then I thought about Diane standing in my kitchen, smirking. About Richard's face when he'd ordered me out of my own home. About 32 years of my life he was ready to discard the moment something better came along. No, I said simply. Margaret, be reasonable. I said no. You wanted this divorce. You chose this path. Now you get to walk it all the way to the end. His expression hardened, the mask slipping again. You're making a mistake. Probably not my first, but it's mine to make. I closed the door in his face. My hands shook as I locked it, but my resolve didn't. That evening, Sarah finally wore me down and came to visit. My daughter, 30 years old, sharp and successful, and so much stronger than I'd ever been at her age. She took one look at me and pulled me into a hug. Mom, you look exhausted. I feel exhausted. Over tea, I told her everything. Not just the legal battle, but the loneliness, the fear, the moments when I questioned whether I was doing the right thing. You know what makes me angriest? Sarah said, her eyes fierce. He waited. He waited until you retired, until you were most vulnerable, and then he pulled this. Like you were disposable. I've been thinking the same thing. Mom, listen to me. You're not disposable. You're not a placeholder in someone else's story. You're the main character of your own life, and you get to decide how this chapter ends. We talked late into the night. She helped me see that this wasn't just about money or property. It was about dignity, about not letting someone rewrite 32 years of my life as if they were worthless. The next morning, my phone rang. Linda. Margaret, I have news. Remember how I requested financial discovery? Richard's bank records just came through, and you're not going to believe what I found. My heart raced. What? He's been moving money. For the past 8 months, he's been transferring funds from your joint account to a separate account in his name only. Small amounts, 500 here, 1,000 there. Probably hoping you wouldn't notice. How much total? Just over $28,000. Margaret, that's dissipation of marital assets. It's essentially stealing from the marriage, and it completely undermines his claim that he's been acting in good faith. I sat down heavily. $28,000. Money I'd helped save, money from both our incomes. What does this mean? It means we have him. Judge Monroe is going to crucify him for this. He's not just trying to keep his inheritance, he's been systematically stealing from you for months, probably planning this whole thing. The betrayal cut deeper than I expected. It wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't a midlife crisis. He'd been planning to leave me for months, carefully, deliberately, stealing from me the entire time. "Linda," I said, my voice cold and clear, "I want everything I'm entitled to. Everything. Then that's what we'll get." 3 days later, they came back. All three of them this time, Richard, Diane, and Kenneth Bradshaw. I was in my garden, pruning the roses my mother had planted 40 years ago, when I heard the doorbell. Then the knocking. Then Richard's voice. "Margaret, we need to talk. This is important." I considered ignoring them. But something in his tone, a forced pleasantness that didn't match his usual anger, made me curious. I opened the door to find them standing on my porch like some grotesque parody of a family portrait. Richard had his hands in his pockets, trying to look casual. Diane wore a sympathetic expression that made my skin crawl. Bradshaw clutched his briefcase like a shield. "Margaret," Richard began, "we came to apologize." I nearly laughed. "Apologize?" "Yes." He glanced at Diane, who nodded encouragingly. "We've been thinking about everything that's happened, and we realize we've approached this all wrong. We want to make peace." "Make peace," I repeated flatly. Diane stepped forward. "Mrs. Hartley, I know you must hate me. I understand that. But Richard and we love each other. We want to start our life together without all this ugliness. And we want you to be able to move forward, too." The audacity. The sheer, breathtaking audacity. "Come in," I said. "Let's hear this." I led them to the living room, my living room, and sat in my father's old armchair. They arranged themselves on the couch like supplicants. Bradshaw cleared his throat. "Mrs. Hartley, my client would like to propose a revised settlement, one that we think you'll find very generous." He pulled out papers from his briefcase. "Mr. Hartley is willing to give you the house outright, no contest. He'll also give you $70,000 from his inheritance as a lump sum payment. In exchange, you'll waive any further claims to the inheritance and agree to a quick, uncontested divorce." 70,000 out of over $1 million. That's less than 7% of his inheritance, I said. "It's very generous considering the inheritance is separate property," Bradshaw countered. "Plus you'd keep the house, which has significant equity." "The house that's already mine. That was never his to bargain with." Richard leaned forward. "Margaret, please, think about what you're doing. These legal battles, they're expensive, stressful. You could take this money, buy a nice condo somewhere, start fresh. Isn't that what you want? A fresh start?" There it was. The manipulation, framing his betrayal as my opportunity. Diane added softly. "And think about your health, Mrs. Hartley. All this stress at your age. It can't be good for you. Richard just wants to take care of you, to make sure you're provided for. At my age, take care of me." I looked at the three of them, Richard with his pleading eyes, Diane with her false concern, Bradshaw with his legal papers and calculated offer. They thought they were being clever. They thought they'd found the right combination of money and manipulation to make me fold. They'd underestimated me. Again. "No," I said. Richard's expression tightened. "Margaret, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable. You stole $28,000 from our joint account over 8 months. You committed fraud by claiming my house as marital property. You brought your mistress into my kitchen and tried to throw me out of my own home. And now you want to buy your way out of the consequences for $70,000. It's not about buying. That's exactly what it is. You want me to disappear quietly so you can live your new life without complications. But I'm not going to disappear, Richard. I'm going to stand right here in my house, and I'm going to fight for every single penny I'm entitled to under the law." Diane's sympathetic mask cracked. You're just being spiteful. You can't stand to see him happy. I turned to her, and whatever she saw in my eyes made her shrink back. Happiness built on lies and theft isn't happiness, Ms. Summers. It's a foundation made of sand, and when it crumbles, and it will, I hope you'll remember this conversation. Richard stood abruptly. Fine, fine. You want to do this the hard way? We'll do it the hard way. But when this is over, when the lawyers have bled us both dry, don't come crying to me. I wouldn't dream of it. Bradshaw gathered his papers quickly, clearly eager to leave. Diane followed, her heels clicking angrily on my hardwood floors. At the door, Richard turned back. You're going to regret this, Margaret. I promise you that. The only thing I regret, I said quietly, is not seeing who you really were 32 years ago. After they left, I stood in my living room, my heart pounding. My hands were shaking, not from fear this time, but from rage, from determination. They'd tried to intimidate me, to manipulate me, to make me doubt myself. They'd failed, and now I was more resolved than ever to see this through to the end. The final hearing arrived 4 weeks later. Linda had spent that time building our case like a fortress. Bank records, email trails, witness statements, financial analysis. She'd even tracked down Robert's estate lawyer in Boston, who confirmed that Richard had been inquiring about his brother's will for over a year before Robert died. He knew Robert was sick, Linda told me the night before court. He was counting on this inheritance, planning for it. That's why he waited to file for divorce. The courtroom was fuller this time. Judge Monroe had scheduled a full day for arguments. Sarah sat behind me, having taken the day off work. On the other side, Richard sat rigid, flanked by Bradshaw and Diane. Linda stood to present our case. Your Honor, what we have here is not a simple divorce. It's a calculated scheme to defraud Mrs. Hartley of her marital rights. Let me walk you through the timeline. She displayed a chart on the projection screen. January 14th of last year, Richard Hartley opens a separate bank account. From that point forward, he begins systematic transfers from the joint marital account, never more than $1,000 at a time, presumably to avoid detection. Bank statements appeared on screen, each transfer highlighted in yellow. July. Robert Hartley is diagnosed with terminal heart disease. Richard begins calling his brother's estate attorney, asking questions about the will. August through October, transfers from the marital account accelerate. November, Robert passes away. December, Richard learns he's the sole beneficiary, over $1.2 million. Linda paused for effect. January 5th of this year, Richard consults with Kenneth Bradshaw about divorce. January 27th, he presents Mrs. Hartley with divorce papers, papers that fraudulently claim her separately owned home as marital property to be divided. January 28th, the inheritance transfer is scheduled to clear. Richard demands Mrs. Hartley leave his house. Judge Monroe's expression was thunderous. Your Honor, Mr. Hartley didn't just plan to leave his wife. He systematically stole from her, lied to her, and attempted to defraud her of her home, all while positioning himself to receive and hide a substantial inheritance. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. This was a calculated, methodical dismantling of a 32-year marriage for financial gain. Bradshaw jumped up. Objection! This is inflammatory! Overruled. Ms. Chen is presenting documented facts. Continue. Linda turned to Richard. Mr. Hartley, in your financial disclosure, you listed your total liquid assets as approximately $15,000. Is that correct? Richard glanced at Bradshaw, who nodded reluctantly. Yes, but our investigation shows you transferred $28,000 from the joint account to your private account. Where did that money go? Silence. Mr. Hartley, you're under oath. There were expenses. What expenses? You were living in Mrs. Hartley's house, eating food purchased with joint funds, paying no rent, no mortgage. What could possibly account for $28,000 in expenses? More silence. Then Diane shifted uncomfortably in her seat, and I saw it, a flicker of realization crossing her face. She hadn't known. She hadn't known how much he'd spent on her. Linda pounced. "Ms. Summers, have you received any gifts from Mr. Hartley in the past year?" Bradshaw shot up. "Your Honor, Miss Summers isn't on trial here." "No, but she's relevant to the question of asset dissipation." "Miss Summers, answer the question." Diane's face flushed red. Richard bought me some jewelry, and we took a trip to the Bahamas, funded with money stolen from his wife." Linda let that hang in the air. "Your Honor, I have credit card statements showing purchases of a $15,000 diamond bracelet, $8,000 in resort charges in Nassau, and another $5,000 in various gifts, all purchased with funds Mr. Hartley siphoned from the marital account while telling Mrs. Hartley they needed to tighten their budget." The courtroom erupted. Sarah gasped behind me. Richard's face went white, then red, then white again. Judge Monroe banged her gavel. "Order! Mr. Bradshaw, does your client have anything to say in his defense?" Richard stood, shaking with rage or fear. I couldn't tell which. "She's twisting everything. Yes, I took some money, but it was my money too. I earned it. Half of everything I made went into that account." "And yet you hid it," Judge Monroe said coldly. "You transferred it secretly, spent it on your mistress, and failed to disclose it in your financial statements to this court. That's not just marital misconduct, Mr. Hartley. That's fraud upon the court. That's perjury." The word perjury seemed to drain the last of Richard's bluster. He sat down heavily. "Your Honor," Linda continued, her voice steady and professional, "we request full restitution of the $28,000 dissipated, plus 50% of the inheritance received during the marriage, plus attorney's fees, plus punitive damages for fraud and intentional infliction of emotional distress." "That's over $500,000, Richard shouted, jumping to his feet again. "Your Honor, you can't. This is insane. That inheritance was from my brother. She has no right." "Mr. Hartley, sit down and be quiet, or I will have you removed from this courtroom." Judge Monroe's voice could have frozen fire. "I've heard enough. Here's my ruling." The courtroom fell completely silent. I could hear my own heartbeat. The house at 1847 Oakwood Drive is Mrs. Hartley's separate property, inherited from her parents. Mr. Hartley has no claim to it whatsoever, and his attempt to include it in the marital estate constitutes fraud. Mr. Hartley will immediately reimburse the $28,000 stolen from the marital account. Furthermore, while the inheritance itself would normally be separate property, Mr. Hartley's egregious conduct, the fraud, the concealment, the systematic theft, the perjury before this court, demonstrates a pattern of behavior designed to deprive Mrs. Hartley of her marital rights and her rightful share of marital assets. Therefore, I'm awarding Mrs. Hartley 40% of the inheritance as her equitable share. That's approximately $480,000. Richard collapsed into his chair like a puppet with cut strings. Additionally, Mr. Hartley will pay all of Mrs. Hartley's attorney fees, which currently total $73,000. The divorce is granted, effective immediately. We're done here. The gavel came down with a sound like thunder. Linda squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. Sarah was crying behind me, her hand on my shoulder. I sat perfectly still, letting it wash over me. The magnitude of it, the finality. I'd won, completely, utterly, without compromise. The aftermath came in waves. Richard tried to appeal, of course. Kenneth Bradshaw filed motions arguing that the judgment was excessive, unfair, unprecedented. He claimed Judge Monroe had been biased, that the punishment didn't fit the crime, that 40% of the inheritance was punitive rather than equitable. Judge Monroe denied every single motion. The ruling stood, ironclad and final. $480,000 from the inheritance, $28,000 in restitution, $73,000 in attorney's fees. All told, Richard owed me over $580,000. He had 30 days to pay. He didn't have it, naturally. The inheritance had already been partially spent on Diane's jewelry, their vacation, a new car I hadn't even known about, expensive dinners, a watch that cost more than our monthly mortgage used to be. His separate account was drained. He'd lived like a millionaire for months, counting on a future that would never come. Now he'd have to liquidate investments, possibly even Robert's Boston apartment, to meet the judgment. The realization of what he'd lost seemed to hit him all at once. 2 weeks after the ruling, Sarah called me, her voice tight with suppressed laughter. "Mom, you need to see this." She'd been monitoring social media, something I'd never had the stomach for. Apparently, Diane had made her Instagram public, and the past few weeks told a story more dramatic than any novel. Photos from the Bahamas, dated 3 months ago. Sunset dinners, champagne by the pool. Diane's hand displaying that diamond bracelet with the caption, "Dreams do come true." Hashtag, blessed hashtag, living my best life. Then, 2 weeks ago, just after the court ruling. Sometimes the universe shows you people's true colors. Hashtag growth, hashtag lessons. 1 week ago. Remember, if they'll cheat with you, they'll cheat on you. Trust is everything. Hashtag moving on, hashtag self-love. And finally, just 2 days ago, a photo of her left hand with a different ring, a different man partially visible in the background. New chapter, new love, new truth. Hashtag single no more. Hashtag fresh start. Hashtag cardio doc. She'd left him. Not gradually, not gently. She'd left him the moment the money evaporated, like a vulture abandoning a carcass picked clean. I should have felt satisfaction. Instead, I felt something closer to pity. Not for Richard, never for Richard, but for the pathetic trajectory of his choices. He'd traded 32 years of marriage, his home, his integrity, and over $500,000 for what? A few months with a woman who'd left him the second he couldn't fund her lifestyle? The payment deadline approached. Linda called me on day 29. "Margaret, Richard's attorney contacted me. He's requesting an extension. Claims he needs more time to liquidate assets." Absolutely not. That's what I told them. If payment isn't received by 5 p.m. tomorrow, we begin contempt proceedings. The judge can order wage garnishment, property liens, even jail time for non-compliance with a court order. "Good," I said, and I meant it. At 4:47 p.m. the next day, 13 minutes before the deadline, the wire transfer came through. Every penny. I imagined Richard at his bank, watching his account drain, watching his brother's inheritance disappear into my account. The inheritance he'd planned for, schemed for, destroyed his marriage for. Gone. I stared at my bank statement, at numbers I'd never imagined seeing in my account. Over $600,000, including the funds he'd stolen and the attorney fees. I was free. Truly, completely free. But the story wasn't quite over. Richard lost his job 3 weeks later. I heard through mutual friends. Apparently, his firm had restructured and his position was eliminated. The truth, which everyone understood but nobody said outright, was that news of the divorce, the fraud, the court judgment had made him a liability. Insurance companies didn't appreciate employees who committed fraud, even in their personal lives. They especially didn't appreciate senior managers who became the subject of courthouse gossip and local news articles about marital fraud. His professional reputation was destroyed. References from his firm were lukewarm at best. Other companies in the industry had heard the story. He had to sell Robert's Boston apartment. The market was down. He took a significant loss. The money went to cover his own attorney fees. Bradshaw hadn't worked for free, and his remaining debts. The credit cards he'd maxed out during his months of living like a wealthy man were now coming due. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that he'd moved into a small rental across town. 1 bedroom, no garden, no garage, no history. The kind of anonymous apartment complex where nobody knows their neighbors. He was working as a claims adjuster now, entry level, the kind of job he'd supervised others doing 20 years ago. The humiliation must have been exquisite. Diane, meanwhile, had moved on completely. Sarah showed me photos of her engagement party with her cardiologist. Older, wealthier, established. She'd already deleted every trace of Richard from her social media. Scrubbed him from her history like he'd never existed, just like he'd tried to do to me. The karmic poetry of it wasn't lost on me. And me? I stood in my garden on a Tuesday morning in June, 6 months after that final court hearing, and took stock of my life. The house was still mine, would always be mine. I'd had it repainted. Fresh colors, warm yellows and soft blues, erasing the last traces of Richard's presence. I'd replaced the furniture in the bedroom we'd shared. New mattress, new linens, new beginning. I'd converted his home office into an art studio. I was learning to paint. Badly, but joyfully. The money sat in a diversified portfolio Linda had helped me set up. Conservative investments, steady growth. More than enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life. Travel when I wanted. Help Sarah with a down payment on her first house. Sarah visited every Sunday. We cooked together, walked in the park, talked about everything and nothing. Our relationship had deepened through this ordeal. She saw me differently now, not just as her mother, but as a woman who'd fought for herself and won. I'd even started dating. Nothing serious. A retired professor I'd met at the library, of all places. James Whitmore. We went to museums, shared meals, talked about books and music and the lives we'd lived. He made me laugh. He respected my independence. He knew my story and admired, rather than pitied me. Most importantly, I'd started volunteering at the local library 3 days a week, helping people navigate research, teaching seniors how to use computers, organizing the children's reading programs. I'd forgotten how much I loved that work, how much purpose it gave me, how good it felt to be valued for my mind, my skills, my presence. Richard had tried to erase me, to reduce me to nothing, so he could start fresh with his stolen inheritance and his younger woman. Instead, I'd erased him. I'd taken everything he'd valued, the money, the control, the power, the future he'd planned, and I'd used it to build something better than what we'd had. I'd won not just legally, but existentially. He'd lost everything: money, dignity, love, respect, security, career, reputation. And I'd never felt stronger. A year after the divorce was finalized, I threw a garden party. It wasn't planned as a celebration, though that's what it became. I'd simply mentioned to Sarah that the roses were particularly beautiful this year, my mother's roses, now thriving under my renewed care, and she'd suggested inviting a few friends over. A few friends became 20 people. Sarah and her husband, Linda Chen and her partner, my book club, neighbors I'd grown closer to over the past year. Professor James Whitmore, the man I'd been seeing who'd somehow become a fixture in my life without either of us quite planning it. We set up tables under the maple tree my father had planted 50 years ago, string lights in the branches, a playlist of jazz standards from my laptop. Food, so much food because apparently when you invite librarians and lawyers to a party, they all bring dishes to share. "Mom," Sarah said, finding me in the kitchen, "you're glowing." I caught my reflection in the window. She was right. At 62, I looked younger than I had at 60. My hair was shorter, stylish in a way I'd never bothered with during my marriage. I'd lost weight from walking every morning with James. I wore colors now, reds and purples and greens, instead of the beiges I'd hidden in for years. "I'm happy," I said, surprised by the simplicity of it. "I'm actually happy." Outside, Linda was telling the story of the trial, her lawyer's instinct for drama in full force. And then the judge says, Mr. Hartley will pay all of Mrs. Hartley's attorney fees, and I swear you could hear his soul leave his body. Laughter rang through the garden. James appeared at my elbow, taking the cheese platter. Let me help. You should be enjoying your own party. We'd been together 8 months now. He'd been patient with my need for independence. He had his own house, his own life. We saw each other 3 or 4 times a week. It was perfect. Have you heard about Richard lately? He asked carefully. Actually, yes. I ran into Barbara Sullivan last week. He's working as a claims adjuster now, junior level, making about a third of what he used to earn. No insurance company will hire him for anything senior after the fraud judgment. James winced. Harsh. Accurate, I corrected. He committed fraud. There are consequences. And Diane? Married the cardiologist. Big wedding in the Hamptons. According to Sarah's Instagram investigation, she's already posting about couples therapy. We carried the food outside together. The party was in full swing. This was my life now. Full. Rich. Surrounded by people who valued me. Later, Sarah raised her glass. A toast to my mother, who taught me that you're never too old to start over, never too scared to fight back, and never obligated to make yourself small for someone else's comfort. Everyone drank to that. I felt tears prickling my eyes. 2 days later, I got a call from an unknown number. Margaret Hartley? A woman's voice, hesitant. Yes? This is Diane Fletcher now. I wanted to apologize. For everything. Richard lied to me about so many things, and I was stupid enough to believe him. I waited. He's been calling me since I got married, saying he made a mistake, that he wants me back. He's not doing well, Margaret. And I just wanted you to know that you were right. About the foundation of sand. It all crumbled. After we hung up, I sat in my car for a long moment. Then I drove home, to my house, my sanctuary, my hard-won peace. Richard had given me the greatest gift, though he'd never understand it. He'd forced me to discover my own strength, and that was worth more than any inheritance. Looking back now, I see the truth clearly. Richard didn't destroy me. He revealed me. For 32 years, I'd made myself smaller, quieter, more convenient. I'd confused peace with silence, love with accommodation. His betrayal hurt, yes, but it also freed me. I learned that dignity isn't given, it's claimed. That age doesn't diminish worth. That the life you've built for yourself is always more valuable than the life someone else builds for you. So I ask you, if someone tried to erase your worth, steal your security, and write you out of your own story, would you fight back? Or would you disappear quietly? Share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe for more stories. And remember, you're never too old to reclaim your life. Thank you for listening to my story.